Since thousands of years ago, doctors began drilling holes in the skulls of patients at the first sign of a runny nose. Scientists have always treated experiments as a necessary evil for the good of science and universal progress. In addition to well-known experiments, for example, the operations carried out by Joseph Mengele on prisoners in the Auschwitz concentration camp, there are many other equally terrible and exciting ones, about which we know very little. Hoefling's experiment with nurses. It boggles the mind how the whole world could calmly watch the mass murder of millions of innocent people at the whim of one dictator. Humanity began to ask this question after the end of World War II, indirectly accusing some European countries of indulging the Nazi regime. However, there is a scientific explanation for this fact. People tend to follow the lead of more authoritative individuals. To prove this theory, psychiatrist Charles Hoefling conducted an experiment to reveal the nature of human obedience. In 1966, he called nursing stations in various types of hospitals and, introducing himself as one of the doctors, gave orders to inject certain patients with 20 mg of the potent drug estrodin, which is twice the permissible dose of 10 mg. All the nurses realized the mortal danger of such an injection, but this did not stop them. 21 of the 22 nurses who took part in the experiment happily followed the doctor's orders, whom they did not even know. Thus, Hoefling proved that the actions of a particular person can be influenced by the authority of a more significant person, even if it is known that she, the person, is wrong. Fortunately, none of the patients were injured. The nurses were stopped in time. Shock therapy by Loretta Bender. Loretta Bender is known to the world as a talented American psychiatrist who invented the visual motor test, Bender-Gestalt test, which experts use to this day to characterize nonverbal intelligence and perceptual motor coordination. However, her contribution to the development of world psychiatry was not as harmless as it might seem at first glance. Loretta Bender worked as a child psychiatrist at Bellevue Hospital in the 1940s. All the while trying to find ways to combat childhood schizophrenia. 98 children were regularly subjected to brutal shock therapy. They were forced to take LSD and hallucinogenic mushrooms, which made them completely insane. If suddenly the children's condition was not severe enough, the doses of administered substances were increased. Bender stated that shock therapy was extremely successful, and only some children subsequently experienced a relapse. Tuskegee syphilis study. Syphilis can lie dormant in the body of an unsuspecting person for decades before it begins to attack his organs. Are doctors able to purposefully avoid simple penicillin injections necessary to combat infection? Of course not, any sane person will say. However, this is exactly what happened in the American city of Tuskegee, Alabama. From 1932 to 1972, almost 400 poor farmers infected with syphilis took part in the experiment. In exchange for the promise of free treatment, by 1947, a way was found to cure them using penicillin injections, but scientists deliberately withheld this information and continued research to study the process of the disease in the human body. As a result, a huge number of people suffered. The test subjects infected their wives and children, and many could not even live to see the end of the experiment. Cyborg rats. Imagine a rat that deliberately watches everything that happens to you, your every move. This is not a nightmare, not science fiction, or even a cartoon character. This is a real rat that exists in reality. Even the military is interested in her life activity. English scientists have combined a rat brain and electronic hardware, creating the world's first cyborg rat. After this procedure, any action of the rodent became possible to regulate remotely using a special control panel. The successful experiment was subsequently improved, and scientists began to use more discrete microprocessors and batteries. The smaller the weight and volume of each part, the more useful devices could be implanted into the experimental creature, including heat sensors and small cameras. The military hopes to be able to use cyborg rats in search and rescue operations. As technological developments blur acceptable boundaries in the field of reconnaissance and surveillance, It becomes alarming to think that we could be being watched by a pair of beady eyes right now. Death ray. Any decent sci-fi movie villain has a death ray, or at least its equivalent. Of course, no matter how spectacular it may look on screen, we know that in real life, it is impossible to melt objects at a distance of 10,0 kilometers. And yet one scientist came up with such an idea. To the question, what is it like to be the smartest person living on Earth? Albert Einstein replied, "You'd better ask Nikola Tesla about that." The Serbian scientist was a real visionary because he developed the idea of Wi-Fi back in 1893 and talked about the possibilities of X-rays long before it became known to the whole world. In science, he has the image of a mad scientist, which is due to his idea to patent a death ray. According to Tesla's idea, the invention was supposed to be an emitter of a beam of charged particles capable of shooting down planes at a distance of 320 km, making the country that owns such weapons absolutely impregnable from the air. Nikola Tesla tried to sell his idea to the USA, USSR, Great Britain and Yugoslavia, but none of these countries took the unusual proposal seriously.